You hear that? Yes, that's the fanboy entering the building alarm. If you followed my couple of reviews for Final Fantasy 7 and 9, you'll already be sick of hearing me laying out my position when it comes to ranking Final Fantasy games. But I'm not ashamed to say one little bit that Final Fantasy X is my second favourite after 7. Controversial amongst Final Fantasy fans for being the obvious choice, well, you know, I don't need to be an edgelord, so I'm here to tell you guys 10 reasons Final Fantasy X is still awesome in 2019.
Sin?
Lou, I'll never forget my days spent with you, growing up in Besaid.
The storytelling for Final Fantasy X is one of the best that has ever graced a JRPG, a genre well known for lacking maturity in a lot of its titles. Final Fantasy X blew me away when playing it for the first time. The story was one of the best I'd ever experienced, and although it's a situation we've seen countless times since, as a young lady must head to the lion's den in order to sacrifice herself for the safety of the world, the writing is what sets this one apart. For me, this was one of the first time characters felt real. I loved the story in 7, but the one found in here had a huge impact for my coming of age as I moved into my teenage years. It felt more mature than ever, despite having the classic romance story between two young people. The writing was great, and the voice acting adds another layer of depth, making it far more relatable. If you're unfamiliar, the story begins as Tidus, or Tidus, is transported to another world. Little does he know that actually it's the same world as his, but thousands of years in the future after the world was destroyed by the very attack that teleported him to this place. It begins weird. After ending up on a tropical island, he meets a beautiful summoner called Yuna, who's ready to begin her quest to protect the world from sin, just as her mother did before her. As Tidus tags along in order to try and discover a way back to his world, he quickly becomes determined to protect Yuna on her quest and obviously fall in love. I love this story. Describing it so succinctly is doing it an injustice because there are so many moments that I adore and pulled on my heartstrings, even more than Final Fantasy VII did during its most famous moment. If you want a very good story, then play Final Fantasy X.
Become a summoner.
A city I had to see with my own eyes.
While it was a beautiful game while playing it, the cutscenes in Final Fantasy X were unparalleled for the time. I don't remember any other game having this much budget put into their cinematic moments as 10 had. It just shows that Square, at the time, were the biggest thing around, and a new Final Fantasy game was an event. No less the first one on the PlayStation 2 where they wanted to show off the muscles that they had. What's remarkable is that they hold up superbly well even to this day, and if a new game released with the quality shown here, many would still be impressed, I'm sure. And yeah, I've always thought that Tidus's face looked a bit off compared to his in-game model, but that's a small complaint. I was blown away when I first saw what the game had to offer, and I distinctly remember playing the demo I got when I first bought Final Fantasy VI on the PlayStation. I just had to get this game. Other PS2 games looked great, but they couldn't hold a candle to the visuals that blew my 11-year-old mind. I remember playing Final Fantasy XII, what was that, like 4 or 5 years later, and I couldn't understand why it seemed to look worse than 10. Yes, 10 looks much better than its sequel. That's how much budget they pumped into it. Nobuo Uematsu is a personal hero of mine. Every soundtrack he has produced during my formative years left an impression on me, and despite scoring every Final Fantasy soundtrack up to 10's point, there was zero evidence his genius was fatiguing, with his exceptional effort put into this one. Final Fantasy X did mark the first time that the legend had help from other composers with the likes of Masashi Hamauzu and Junya Nakano. No doubt to the huge task at hand for the amount of locations and themes needed to be put into this one. You can tell there is a slightly different flair to this one as the two assistants contributed nicely with some memorable tunes of their own, but it's Nobuo's themes that shine through though, as there are some downright classics in this entry. To Zanarkand and Isn't It Wonderful are some of the best the series has to offer. And even if we can debate as to which Final Fantasy soundtrack is the best until the cows come home, 10 can easily make a case for itself. It's also worth noting that in this version you can switch between soundtracks, the original and the slightly updated version for the remaster. Around 60 songs from the vast soundtrack were updated or tweaked to give a slightly different mood or feeling and utilize the better tools available. Apparently, the original soundtrack used the PS2's built-in tone generator and so was limited to certain sounds, which led to some tracks not sounding as originally intended. It's a bit of a divisive addition, with some preferring the original and feeling the updated tracks weren't quite so necessary, but at least you can switch between the two. While Final Fantasy games are known for their excellent and numerous minigames, for me there are three that stand out as top tier distractions. Triple Triad from Final Fantasy VIII, Chocobo Breeding from 7, and of course BLITZBALL in 10. I know that this is often the most divisive of the minigames, with many people despising it, but as someone who loves football, no, not American football, BLITZBALL was an absolute delight for me back in the day. I loved going around Spiera, recruiting players and trying my hand at winning the league. It was tough too, almost unforgiving at times, but I reveled in it. I think if you love sports, you'll probably love BLITZBALL. Final Fantasy games were always known for throwing a curveball when it came to character development. In 9, the abilities were learned through equipment, in 8, magic was absorbed from enemies, in 7, pretty much anyone could equip anything with limited space. 10 was no different in changing things up, this time with the sphere grid. This is where experience points are scrapped and predetermined stat increases are binned. You have a free-ish reign to take your character where you want them to go. The expert version allows total freedom in which you can make any character anything you want them to be. Tired of Yuna's meager physical hits? Well, in expert mode you can take her on the path of a hard-hitting warrior if you so please. This also makes multiple playthroughs far more interesting. I really enjoyed the sphere grid in this one, and I wish we saw it more often in games. Final Fantasy X is a big game. It's pretty standard for a JRPG to last you a good length of time, and 10 is no different. You're looking at a meaty 50-hour well-paced story to enjoy, but that's only scratching the surface. Final Fantasy X is packed with side stuff to do, more than any other JRPG that I can think of, and it's not just menial stuff either. I mentioned BLITZBALL, which is a beast on its own, but there's also the monster capturing, the dark AEONS, and getting the celestial weapons. These will take you a couple hundred of hours no problem. If you want a game to last you through the summer, then this one is for you. The best thing is that none of these are actually required to get through the game, and on my first playthrough when I was a kid, I probably never even touched them, possibly not even being aware of them. The whole monster capturing side quest certainly passed me by back in the day because I was all about catching them all around that time. One of the things I loved about Final Fantasy X is the vast amount of locations and environments that you'll encounter on your journey to protect Yuna. While featuring a wide variety of landscape, there is a heavily influence from tropical Southeast Asia, and it's great, hugely different from your standard medieval fantasy affair. While you're whisked away to Besaid or Kilika, it just feels so different to other RPGs that you've played. Having been around the region that this world was influenced by, maybe it's far more impactful for me, but I doubt anyone could say that this is uninteresting. I love how it intermingles the wreckage caused millennia ago. From the tropical huts of Besaid to the ruins of Zanarkand, contrast is well played because it adds so much to the stakes, because you know that this is what will happen again if you fail in your mission. This is what Luca or Bevel will look like if you don't stop Sin. Back in the day, it was a very beautiful game, especially in the art direction. While 15 years later it may not be the killer app it once was, it's still worth an adventure just to see the vast, varied world. Summons have always played a big part in Final Fantasy culture. Sometimes they take more of a backseat, others they play an integral role in the plot, such as in Final Fantasy VI. Once again, they are in the limelight here in 10, this time called AEONS. There's not a whole lot compared to previous entries, only 5 mandatory ones and 3 optional ones. But this shouldn't let you think that this is meager because they offer a lot more than what had ever come before. They can actually be controlled just like a character in your party. They can be upgraded, learn abilities, they have their own health and magic points. They truly feel part of the team, and you'll be using them regularly in epic battles. Also, obviously I could make the old joke about them being called AEONS because they take AEONS to actually summon and use, but I'm more cultured than that. Now, hear me out, I'm usually against JRPGs being totally linear. In fact, I despised Final Fantasy XIII just because it seemed like one long corridor walk. But Final Fantasy X seemed to have found that perfect balance. It's linear, but it hides it very well. The pacing is great and environments are diverse and large, so you don't really notice the lack of an overworld. With means to travel freely between locations forbidden until late in the game, it makes you truly feel like you're on this pilgrimage through the world of Spira. It doesn't have an open world you can wander around, but it doesn't need one. Yes, I like the fact that Final Fantasy X is linear. I said that. Now I know I've been talking exclusively about Final Fantasy X, but one of the biggest perks for this HD re-release is that Final Fantasy X HD comes bundled with its sequel, Final Fantasy X Part 2. A whole extra game, sharing the same world and many of the same characters but completely turning the gameplay on its head. I think X-2 was a game that was always going to be up against it when compared to the original, just for being so drastically different. It didn't gel well with me back in the day, but I'm raring to give it another go out of the massive hype leading up to it and playing it in its own context. Adding X-2 to the collection means that you're doubling your content with another 40 hours of story or another 100 hours to do everything. That's so much content. And there we have 10 reasons Final Fantasy X is still awesome in 2019. Are you going to be picking it up? Let us know in the comments below. Now head over to watch one of our Final Fantasy extravaganza videos. 9, 7, Chocobo. I'll see you guys on one of those. Take care.